Events unfold in a temple engulfed in a mighty fire that completely enveloped the building, and dense smoke made it impossible to see. Inside the church, on its floor, lay a photograph of a nun and 3 children, in danger of being completely destroyed by fire. A little boy, one of the children in the photograph, was also inside and sobbing bitterly. Next to him was a little girl who had lost consciousness due to the smoke, and her companion was helpless to help. The nun was lying on the floor, and the 3rd child from the photograph stood in front of him with a knife. Presumably, he was the initiator of this terrible scene. Calling himself Jaffe, he turned to the guy, expressing the question of whether the boy would ever be able to forget and forgive him for what happened. The hero, with eyes full of tears, demanded an explanation from his former comrade for his cruel actions. Suddenly, a heavy wooden beam fell on the guy from behind, hitting him right on the head. Under its influence, the guy collapsed to the ground, completely lost movement, and he did not even have enough strength to continue the fight for life. With the last of his strength, the boy pulled his hand towards the burning photograph, being almost unconscious. Fortunately, he managed to survive, and events take us 7 years forward, where the hero partially restored the photograph, but the traitor Jaffe disappeared from it. The city where he lived was called Dachio, and it was night on the streets when the guy visited an establishment called the Night Court. There had apparently been a fight inside, and one of the waiters was lying on the floor, bleeding, with visible signs of being beaten. One of the bandits, known as Li Hu, asked the owner to witness the incident, despite her reluctance to comply with this request. The hostess's name was Shen Hua, an attractive young girl with blonde hair who wanted no part of this and asked the guest to leave the place. The man flared up with anger, considering the granddaughter of the great seer to be arrogant, but the Yellow Tiger Gang was not going to give in either. Apparently, the bandit was going to find another way to get the bar owner to testify, and the girl asked what he was up to. Li Hu immediately ordered his accomplices to force Shan Hua to testify using force since she refused to do so willingly. One of the men grabbed the girl, but she resisted with all her might, outraged that the attack took place right in her establishment. Everyone else was ordered to leave the establishment, and people hurried out of the bar, not wanting to deal with the fight that broke out. At this time, the hero entered the room, surprised by the mass departure of visitors, and he wondered if something serious had happened. This man was known as Fang Xiao, and he came here after learning that the local authority had numerous connections, and perhaps this bandit had met Jaffe before. The man became angry when he saw this stranger, and did not understand why he was in no hurry to leave the place where chaos was clearly going on. Instead of leaving, the guy began rummaging through his bag, doing this for a minute, and Li Hu was forced to just stand and wait, wondering what he was looking for. It turned out that the hero was looking for a drawing of his own creation, which depicted his former friend, and perhaps the bandit had once seen this man. It seemed to the man that this stranger might be trying to help the owner of the establishment, or perhaps he was too stupid to understand what was happening. Fang Xiao did not show the slightest fear of the guy, even despite his smaller height, and the guy noticed that the weak were being used here, and decided to ask the question again. Fang Xiao pointed to his drawing and slowly repeated the question if Li Hu had ever seen Jaffe from the orphanage. The man flared up with rage. How dare this brat behave so rudely? And there was nothing in the hands of cultivation. Immediately after this, there was a powerful blow with his hand, but the guy did not even try to dodge. He stood still. After the attack, Li Hu found himself thrown back, although Fang Xiao did not take any further action, simply stating that his card would protect him. The guy, in a calm voice, asked the bandit to behave calmly, trying to convey that it was better to fulfill the request. At this moment, the embodiment of spiritual power appeared behind the hero's back, and it became clear that Fang Xiao was an unusual person. Li Hu, a mid-level cultivator chosen by fate to be the protector of the Yellow Tiger clan, realized that he needed to protect the weak. In his opinion, this brat had no right to come here and contradict his elders, and he needed to be taught a lesson in respect. The villain attacked again, declaring that the guy should not elevate himself to the level of a god. It was clear from the guy's expression that Feng Xiao was confident in himself, and he calmly replied that he was not really pretending to be a god. The hero activated his technique, and his spiritual power became even more powerful, surrounding him with red light. Their forces clashed in a duel, as if lightning and fire flew towards each other. The bandit's fist and the guy's fist stopped after the collision, but at first glance, the strength of their spiritual energy seemed approximately equal. It immediately became clear from Li Hu's face that he was in great pain, blood flowed from his mouth, and he could not comprehend where such terrible power came from. The opponent's blow was so strong that the man's body flew several meters and collided with an obstacle. The bandit was pinned against the wall, his clothes torn to shreds. Feng Xiao's attack was clearly ahead of the standard clashes. The guy, standing below, continued to remind him of his request, trying to find out if anyone from the gang had seen the man he was looking for. But the answer never came, forcing the hero to again turn to his deities for support, and Li Hu, apparently, could not even utter a word, and it seemed to him that after this blow, inevitable death awaited him. This time the guy extended his hand forward, and a powerful beam of spiritual energy shot out from it. The attack turned out to be much more destructive than the previous time. The bandit was lucky, and the blow missed Li Hu a few centimeters. Fan Xiao understood that there was no way to learn anything new from a dead person. A few seconds later, the man collapsed on the floor, and his appearance clearly indicated that he was no longer able to continue resisting. The hero came closer and put his hand on his head, repeating his request, and now it was important for him to find out what Li Hu knew about Jia Fei. But the owner of the establishment suddenly intervened, asking the guy who he was and why he had made a mess in her establishment. The girl somehow managed to defeat the rest of the bandits, also showing good skills in cultivating spiritual energy. Feng Xiao began to make excuses, noting that this person started the fight, and the bandit pretended to be dead. The guy tried to shake his enemy so that he would confirm his words, but the man stubbornly pretended to be dead. Xinhua assumed that the hero was a member of another gang that was at war with the Yellow Tiger Gang, and decided to get rid of him. Having already been troubled by gang fights in her bar, she also had the skills to cultivate spiritual energy and could defend herself. Feng Xiao easily stopped her attack, trying to explain that he was just an ordinary guy looking for an old acquaintance. But the owner of the establishment thought that he was pretending to be a fool, and why shouldn't she get rid of him? The girl struck again, but the hero managed to repel her attack, and now he needed to calm Xinhua and convince her that he was right. Feng Xiao once again stated that he was just an ordinary guy from an orphanage looking for an old acquaintance. The bar owner became frightened. Her arms were blocked, and she screamed for them to let her go, which led to them both falling to the floor. As a result, they both lay on the floor, creating an uncomfortable scene, but now the hero's words became easier to believe. However, if he is not a member of the Yellow Tiger Gang and is not looking for ritual distributors, why did he choose this particular bar? The guy again took out his artistic masterpiece and announced that this was the person he was looking for, and he wouldn't mind snacking on fried rice. The owner of the establishment replied that this is still a bar, and they don't have fried rice on the menu. People usually don't come here for dinner. Xinhua's stomach suddenly began to growl, and since there was no fried rice, she offered noodle dumplings and ice cream. Xinhua was surprised, and this guest was really strange, and they would not be offered noodle dumplings, but, apparently, he will have to come up with something. That evening the hero was treated to a treat, and he noticed that it was quite cool in the northern regions. Even inside the establishment the temperature was low. The girl replied that it was probably because of the hole that he himself had created, and he would have to pay for the damage. Now the owner believed that he did not belong to a gang, but who is he, and how did he manage to so easily defeat Li Hu, whose physical training looked rather weak? Suddenly, something happened behind Feng Xiao, but he continued to eat his food without paying attention. Xinhua was a little scared, and I've never seen things like this before, and perhaps it was her guest's special ability. It turned out that it was Zhang from the state of Yin who appeared in this world, since the hero had the ability to contact the gods. However, The explanation only confused Shenhua even more, and she fell to the floor in fear, and that day turned out to be too strange for her. If we go into detail, it was Zhang who could use this guy to communicate with various gods and embody them in himself. The spirit began to boast that he was not only an unsurpassed commander, but also an excellent artist of portraits of women, and he also asked Shenhua to become his model. The girl was slightly embarrassed by such a proposal, but she had already begun to come to her senses and agreed. Feng Xiao extended his hand to help her stand up, explaining that the spirit is currently immaterial and only serves as an assistant to the God communication system. But before continuing the conversation, the guy wanted to know about the shelter, and he asked the hostess, but Shenhua asked not to call him that, because she had just turned 17 years old. All she knew was that the Lihu clan and his yellow tiger were fighting the ritual clan, and the bets between them were who would be the first to find the temple abbot's rosary and get the land with the ruins of the old orphanage. According to the rules of the cultivators, each party must provide its own witness from one of the main currents. The bar opened after her grandfather, a former great black warrior seer, gained respect in his family. That is why attention fell on her, offering her a certificate with the possibility of a good reward. Feng Xiao asked why the new acquaintance refused, because the work seemed quite simple. Shenhua did not want to go there for fear of possible trouble. Suddenly, the guy offered her a brilliant solution to the problem. The hero knew that the bandit was pretending to be dead and ordered him to end his game. The man reluctantly agreed and began to open his eyes. Feng Xiao informed him that as a member of the Yellow Tiger Gang, he should reveal the leader of the organization. The Yellow Tiger's office was huge, and even Shenhua, with her reputation, could not easily meet with the head. The girl did not understand the purpose of her new acquaintance, especially after he let Lihu go. She tried to warn him and express her dissatisfaction with Zhang's challenge, but he ignored her. In response to her questions, Feng Xiao asked why not watch how a god is summoned. Summoning the spirit turned out to be not free, and you had to pay for it in crystals. The spirit announced that his powers would be limited by the map, so he would not be able to fight at his full capacity. But he vowed to maximize his potential. The spirit tore the green card, activating a system of appealing to the gods called the Star of Fate. This time, a method of appealing to the gods called the Star of Fate was used, and the spirit began to absorb the power. Feng Xiao watched this process in admiration, seeing such a fascinating ability for the first time. For her it was like in novels, full of system hacking and mysterious calls, and what a Star of Fate was remained a mystery to her, but the guy was not ready to answer her questions. Questions to the head of the organization remained unanswered, since there was no time for conversations. While the Yellow Dragon boss was studying in his office, he was a massive man who did not stop training even now. Lihu was also there, covered in sweat, reporting to his boss about the arrival of a miner who wanted to talk to him. Shizhen Sha, the leader of the organization, has already called all the disciples of the Yellow Tiger Current to finally deal with this newcomer. His subordinates stood outside, monitoring everything around him, and if a guy wants to meet the leader, he will have to overcome many obstacles. Lihu admires this approach, and this person really knows how to run his organization, and however, their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Feng Xiao entered and easily dealt with all the bandits. He immediately asked if they had seen Jia Fei. The men were amazed at how this guy got inside, bypassing a multi-story building with security. Shizhen Sha flared up with rage. How dare this guy invade his office, and his actions did not inspire respect. Suddenly his left eye lit up yellow, and the leader of the Yellow Tigers decided to teach the hero a lesson in strength, because there will always be a force stronger than the previous one. Although the guy did not want to fight, he wanted an answer to his question. However, the leader did not listen to him, and he wanted Feng Xiao to feel the power of the Yellow Tiger's current. The leader delivered a quick and powerful blow, but the guy dodged. The attack was incredibly powerful. A friend warned me to be careful. This guy was at the level of the elixir of immortality, above the level of chi cultivation. During the battle, the The hero demonstrated incredible speed and agility, avoiding blows, and Shurjan Shah admired his movements. But the leader of the Yellow Tigers decided that he only needed one accurate and strong blow. Unfortunately, his strike was too slow, and Fang Xiao ended up above him, summoning his spirit. The next moment the guy was on the bandit's neck, ready to attack. The hero decided to stop dodging and start a counterattack. But luck was not on the side of the stupid tiger. The hero pulled out a powerful card and was going to finish the battle with one blow. This ability, used by ancient warriors to hunt tigers, was ideal for this situation. However, Shurjan Shah was not going to give in without a fight. He counted on the ease of blocking even such a powerful attack. However, at a certain moment, the floor beneath him collapsed, and he began to fall down, and he managed to cope with this energy, but the concrete floor turned out to be not so durable. The attack was so powerful that the shock wave nearly destroyed the entire room, and magic and other small objects were flying everywhere. Shurjan Shah fell halfway down the floor, and the upper part of his body still remained in the office, making normal movement impossible. The enemy wasted no time, and by the time the cloud of dust cleared, it became clear that the guy was about to strike again. After a few seconds, Fang Xiao rushed forward screaming, trying to scare the bandit, and it worked, and the man shouted back. The boss of the organization asked to stop, and he admitted defeat and was ready to talk, and the hero complied with his request, since this is exactly what he wanted from the very beginning. Shenhua and Li Hu stood aside the entire time, watching with absolute shock on their faces. Yellow Tigers have always convinced others with the power of their principles, and Shurjan Shah points out to the guy that he turned a good office into ruins. Fang Xiao realized that these people did not know who Jia Fei was, and therefore recommended that the bandits take him as a witness to the monastery. In the future, it is better not to go to the court bar at night, and Elle better stop bothering the owner of the establishment, and the girl even blushed slightly from embarrassment. There was a small problem with the choice of witness. According to the activation rules, only a respected person can be a witness. Shenhua realized that the leader of the organization was hinting at a competition that did not depend on strength, because her new friend had already demonstrated everything necessary. It turned out to be true, and now the hero has to defeat these two men in drinking so that they recognize him and begin to call him bro. The guy thought 3 bottles is still okay, but more than 4 is too much, and the situation was difficult. Even considering his spirit, it was impossible to drink so much at once. Suddenly his new girlfriend put her hand on his shoulder, and I really was going to help in this matter somehow. Indeed, the girl decided to take at least a few bottles of alcohol in order to gain the respect of the gang of Yellow Tigers. An hour later the heroes were already heading home, and Shenhua seemed to enjoy the competition and the guy had to carry her in his arms. In fact, she did not want to go there because 7 years ago there was a fire in the welfare shelter in which no one survived, and the circumstances remain unknown, and this event is called the Crimson Night. Also, 2 years ago there was a fire in another orphanage, and the media called it a new Crimson Night. Her grandfather died that night. The girl became interested in why Fang Xiao so persistently strives for the leader of the Yellow Tigers, and perhaps finding this person was extremely important to him. However, instead of answering, the guy noticed that she had come after all, which irritated his girlfriend, and she said that she definitely didn't come because of him. The next day, the gang of Yellow Tigers and the heroes headed to the meeting. They only had 10 minutes. With horror, Shurjan Shah recalled yesterday's confrontation, and Shenhua had no chance against them, and as a result, the men began to call her sister. But she didn't like it, and perhaps she was so old that she could be called sister. The leader of the organization continued to call the girl this way today, but in fact, the Yellow Tigers were simply trying to express their admiration. Meanwhile, Fang Xiao was thinking about the new Crimson Night, and he knew about the first fire, since he had been there himself, but he knew little about the second incident. Soon everyone arrived at the meeting place, where another gang was already waiting for them. The leader of the movement of spreading rituals was a man named Zhao Zixin, and it seemed to him that Shurjan Shah came too late, and the old man was so scared. The men immediately began to argue, and the leader of the ritual propagation clan said that their era had come, and the boss of the Yellow Tigers believed that this guy had not yet dried the milk on his lips to say such things. Their argument was interrupted by a woman who suddenly appeared on the roof of the building and suggested that they save their energy to resolve the dispute. Her name was Hua. She was the lead inspector of the Green Dragon Current, and she was tasked with acting as a witness for the ritual propagation current. Zhao Zixin recommended that his opponent greet her, emphasizing that respect for manners would not hurt, and Shizhen Sha happily bowed and apologized. The currents of Yellow Tigers and the spread of rituals are subordinated to one of the 4 major currents of the Black Warrior. The entire north is under the control of a Black Warrior, so seeing her was like spotting a ghost, and it was reminiscent of the flow of a white tiger from the guy's native place. Suddenly, a woman jumped off the roof and walked up to Fang Xiao, and she wondered how such a handsome man could exist without a drop of cultivation, and is this really a gift for her? In response to her question, Hua put her hand on his shoulder and said that this was not a gift for her, and he should be more punctual, and this behavior is unacceptable. Everyone thought that things were going very badly for the Yellow Tigers if this little guy was acting as a witness on their behalf. Suddenly the doors to the temple opened, and an elderly man came out, and he asked who was making so much noise and why was stopping people from cultivating. After that, everyone stopped talking, and after all, he was an elder monk, and his rosary had to be earned in order to have the right to land near the former monastery. Within a few minutes, everyone was already inside, and now the trial began, where each side would present its arguments. The monk first asked why there was a sudden desire to return the lands now, given that the previously agreed-upon limit of 10 years had only passed 7. Zhao Zixin was annoyed by the old man's questions, and it didn't matter to him why they needed it, and if they wanted it, then they wanted it, and his task was only to reach a verdict. Suddenly a stone flew towards him, hitting the monk's bald head, and it turned out that these were children who were looked after by an elderly man, and they noticed that this bandit was acting stupid. The indignant leader of the ritual movement wanted to punish the children, but Shizhen Sha ordered him to shut up, because children need to be spoken to more restrainedly. Their argument was interrupted by Hua, reminding them that some people were going to work tomorrow, and if they don't stop, she'll leave right now. Fang Xiao asked the old man where the children came from here, and it seemed like they were from a welfare shelter that burned down 2 years ago. They were all brought by one man that night when the second Crimson Night happened, and the children had nowhere to go, and only here could they find shelter. All this time the monk was trying to restore the ruins of the orphanage, but due to his poor health he was unable to do anything, and human resources seemed to be limited. The guy wondered if it was Jia Fei who brought the children here, and why he burned the orphanage a second time. The monk ordered the children to go to bed because he needed to discuss important issues with these people, and children had no place here. And then something happened that surprised everyone present. The old man sharply approached the doors of the temple and opened them, ordering all participants to go outside, and it was better to resolve all issues in the fresh air. Meanwhile, night fell outside, and the abbot and everyone else stood in the street, and the judge announced the start of negotiations, and everyone had the right to express their arguments. Instead of conducting a normal dialogue, the men began shouting at each other, claiming that the land near the shelter belonged to them. The argument soon escalated into a full-blown brawl, and Shizhen Sha and Zhao Zixin decided that this was the easiest way to resolve the conflict. Their cultivation stages were low, but their strength was equal, and their fight could destroy everything around them. But suddenly the monk caught a maple leaf that was flying by and told a story about meeting an incredibly cruel man. Despite admonitions and attempts to change him, the monk remained fierce, and somehow these feelings did not leave him for a minute. It was this guy's fault that there was a fire in the orphanage on that second Crimson Night. Fang Xiao and Shenhua wondered if the old man was mentioning Jia Fei now, and if so, he may have more information about him. The rage of the two leaders of different organizations flared up again, and if they wanted the monk's rosary, they could come and take it without involving innocent people. The men rushed to the monk as soon as they heard this, and it seemed that it would be easy for them to take the item from the abbot. However, the old man suddenly raised his hands, and a barely noticeable golden glow flickered around him, and apparently, he was preparing for his blow. Suddenly, both opponents fell to the ground at the same time, and it all happened so quickly that they didn't even have time to notice how they were put out of action. It was a special technique that could only be learned after spending decades in cultivation, and now these two could not even move. Their argument was hopeless. The monk suggested that they lower their swords, believing that this was the only way to reach a compromise and follow the righteous path, and otherwise the conflict could not be resolved. It was amazing, and the older man was really serious, and he dealt with these two with ease, indicating that his cultivation was significantly higher. The old man advised everyone to return to the temple and go to bed, and it's late, and it's better to deal with this in the morning. The abbot suddenly stopped Feng Xiao. He was worried about the person who set fire to the orphanage 2 years ago, and he didn't want to wait until the morning. The monk replied that today he had already talked a lot and was tired, and now it's time to go inside and have a good rest. However, the guy was not going to wait that long, and he has been trying for many years to find at least some information about his former friend. Feng Xiao offered the old man a fight, and if he manages to defeat the monk's rosary, he will receive the answer to his question, and Tarek was surprised by this offer. The two leaders lay motionless on the floor, warning the hero that the monk was incredibly strong. According to the rules, Nianbo should have intervened, but she didn't care about the outcome of the battle, and this piece of land did not interest her, and Feng Xiao's chances of winning were extremely small. An experienced warrior will never yield to a guy without cultivation, and the woman was just hoping to laugh while watching this. Li Hu was ready to get into a fight, but he was asked to calm down and not interfere. However, he could do something else, and Feng Xiao asked to give him the promised reward as an advance payment. And why did he need the crystal right now? In this situation, the stone was simply necessary, and only with its help can the hero turn to the gods. Immediately after receiving the crystal, the guy activated the circulation system and once again summoned the spirit Zhang. The attack should have been carried out instantly, given that the monk was far from an ordinary opponent, and therefore, the hero instantly soars into the air. He then filled his fist with light green energy, trying to finish the fight as quickly as possible, and it was best to reduce the fight to one blow. The old man is surprised by the unusual strength of his opponent, and he has never had to deal with such an opponent before, and he takes a defensive stance. As soon as the abbot raised his hands in front of him, Feng Xiao immediately hit him with full force, and it appears that the elderly man is having difficulty staying on his feet. A moment after the impact, he flies back several meters, and his protective stance helped avoid injury, but it was impossible to stay in place. As a result, the monk ends up on the ground, and even decades of training did not help him in this fight, and it seems that he lost after just one blow. Everyone around is shocked, but at first glance, this guy doesn't even look like a cultivator. Why did he manage to defeat such a powerful opponent? Nianbo became even more interested in the hero, and by the way, why did Zhang appear here and stand with everyone? And this is the question she asked Shenhua, but, as it turned out, others did not see it. Suddenly, the elderly man changed his behavior dramatically, and a strong anger flashed in his eyes, and he ordered Feng Xiao to stand still. The guy was surprised by this answer, and he hoped that the old man would tell him about the man who brought the children on the second Crimson Night. After the attack, he was still holding the rosary in his hands, although he was unable to resist the attack, but in fact the battle was just beginning. This behavior was explained by the fact that the monk recognized Feng Xiao as his old friend Jia Fei, and their actions were almost identical. Deciding to get rid of the source of endless hatred, the Guardian activates all his powers and moves to a completely new level of Qi mastery. At this time, the old man remembered the night when he asked the guy if Jia Fei was confident in his beliefs and if he still wanted to do this. The guy replied that this is just the beginning, and little things will never be able to stop him because the goal he is pursuing is still too far away. In his search for what he needs, Jia Fei is willing to do whatever it takes, no matter how dirty he can get his hands. These two people were incredibly similar, their persistence and desire to achieve their goals reached an incredible level. The monk activated his technique. The leaves thickened and dispersed. The crows sat, and the frightened ones scattered. These are the words he said during preparation. Now this person had a completely different level of strength compared to his previous state. The body at the immortal elixir stage, and the sword that was forming was simply unfathomable. An evil fate was about to fall upon Feng Xiao, and he had to try very hard to survive this ordeal. This weapon was called the Spear of the White Tiger God, and only the most devoted and persistent members of the northern cult could master it. The old man instantly rushed to attack, forcing the guy to look for ways to defend himself, since in the current situation he had no chance left. At some point, the guy realized that he was unable to follow the movements of his opponent, and they were so fast that the eyes could not keep up with them. The monk instantly approached the guy and struck with the Spear of God at supersonic speed, and the fall was precise. And now all that remained was to assess how serious the wound was. Feng Xiao was able to rise to his knees and jump back a few meters, but the situation was getting worse every second. Fortunately, the cut was shallow, but his hand and part of his face were bleeding, and he was lucky that all parts of his body remained in place. Shunhua was deeply worried about her friend, and he shouldn't have gotten into this fight, and despite his unique abilities, it was excessively dangerous against such an experienced opponent. She asked Zhang why he didn't help his friend, and wasn't this his duty as a burglar on the way to summoning the gods? Zhang was not actually a burglar, and the girl should read less novels, and he merely served as a conduit for the system of appealing to the gods, and if the hero does not want to fight, Zhang cannot force him. It should be noted that if the guy loses here, it will mean that he is only at the level of this older man. Meanwhile, the wound on Feng Xiao's forehead began to bleed heavily, which only worsened the situation, blinding his right eye and making the situation even more difficult. In addition, his opponent again approached him, being close, and now it was urgent to find a way out of this situation, otherwise everything could end very badly. This monk seemed to be a perfect and unflappable warrior, and he had no weak spots to hit. Suddenly the guy turned to the support group asking if anyone had rice wine, and the crowd was amazed at such an unusual request. Naturally, none of them had rice wine with them, and why would rice wine be needed in such a situation, and what was he going to do with it? However, Shunhua pulled out a small flask of alcohol from her secret pocket, and if he needed it only to fully unleash his power, then any type of alcohol would do. The girl quickly threw the flask towards her comrade, hoping that this thing could help him if he could get his hands on it. Unfortunately, this plan was prevented, and the enemy instantly stopped all attempts at this trick by cutting the bottle in one quick movement. Such violations of the rules made the monk hateful, and drinking is forbidden in this monastery, and the rules must be followed, especially if you are an outsider here. Because of this, the summoned spirit was deeply disappointed, and why spoil good wine? And Feng Xiao even asked the enemy if the master didn't like wine at all. The monk's face still showed strong hostility, and such questions offended him, because how could a monk drink alcohol? It was absolutely unacceptable. The guy asked him if the abbot had heard the saying that wine and meat pass through the belly, but Buddha remains in the heart, and apparently, the hero had a plan aimed at pissing off his opponent. This worked quite well, and Anak was finally reached, and he ordered the guy to shut up, and he couldn't let the children from the orphanage fall into the hands of such people. The old man launched another fast and powerful attack. It seemed that it was even stronger than the previous one, and as a result, a wall of smoke rose up around them. Xinhua was surprised by the abbot's change in behavior, and why did he get angry so suddenly, and was he really so offended by the words about wine? Zhangzhe seems to have guessed the plan, and the years he spent fighting with Feng Xiao helped him better understand what was going on in his friend's head. The guy dodged the monk's blows with all his might, continuing to joke. The elder did not expect such dexterity from his opponent, and at the moment he was on the edge, but the advantage remained entirely on the monk's side. The hero continued to tease the enemy, trying to find a way out of the situation. Was he really so enraged by a few phrases about wine? But the old man was very annoyed, and began to carry out a series of blows with his spear, and however, Fang Xiao dodged with ease. The elder completely lost his temper. His face was covered with sweat. It was clear that he was wasting all his strength, and the abbot orders the stranger to leave the monastery. Fang Xiao continued to walk away, dodging the blows of the monk, who was already drenched in sweat and looked exhausted. At some point it became clear that the old man was exhausted, his energy was running out, and we had to take advantage of this. The hero notices that the old man is exhausted and decides to prepare a kick attack right at the weak spot. The hero knew that in order to effectively use White Tiger techniques, he needed to maintain composure. The master completely lost his mental balance. His blows became slower. Shenhua realized that the bottle of wine was intended to irritate the abbot. The bottle of alcohol finished off the monk, who was already mentally broken because of the memories of the man and the temple. It is inexplicable how Fang Xiao understood the principles of White Tiger cultivation without cultivating them himself. The kick throws the old man off balance, and the initiative goes to Fang Xiao. Instead of taking advantage of the opponent's helplessness, the hero slows down for a moment and waits for the best moment to attack. Fang Xiao makes a lightning dash forward, and a moment later he is already at the side of the rector of the temple, and it's time to end this fight. This time the monk does not have time to follow such fast movements, and he cannot adequately react to such a maneuver, and the guy apologizes to the master for this in advance. The hero grabs his opponent by the belt from behind and throws him across himself, and even with the unique ability to appeal to the gods, such a technique was quite difficult. The throw turns out to be extremely powerful, and sparks from strong spiritual energy fly into the area, and the stone floor beneath them cracks, and pieces of cobblestone fly in different directions. It seems that this is really hard to believe, considering Fang Xiao's physical condition, which left much to be desired, and it turned out that he had never trained his muscles. But somehow he manages to do it, and in this duel he remains the winner, despite the great advantage of the abbot of the temple. The guy turns to the monk and asks if he was seriously injured, but in fact, the hero did not want this fight, much less harm the elderly man. Fortunately, the master's wounds are not particularly serious, and he only has a broken forehead and a little tattered clothes, and he still cannot believe that his determination was not enough. At the same time, the monk was very tired, and that benefactor defeated him, and there is no point in arguing anymore, and now the rosary rightfully belongs to him. According to the terms of the deal, ownership of the orphanage now passes to Fang Xiao, and the Yellow Tiger Gang effectively controls all the land around this place. Shizhen Sha and the others were glad that the ritual distribution gang would not get anything, and who knows what these strange people could be up to. Suddenly, 3 children came out in front of Fang Xiao, blocking his path to the temple abbot, and called on him to stop fighting, and they didn't want the wanderer to continue fighting and offered themselves as a sacrifice. They didn't want this wanderer to continue to beat him. If he really wanted to hurt someone, then he'd better hit each of them. At this moment, the guy was lost in his thoughts. Of course, he did not intend to harm anyone, just old memories surfaced in his head. How similar these 3 children were to him and his 2 comrades in childhood, and this elderly man was able to become a father to them, just like that nun became their mother. Shenhua understood that everything was already over and the hero would not continue the fight. She hurried to calm the kids down, but suddenly something strange began to happen. As it turned out, Fang Xiao for some reason put a huge amount of spiritual energy into the rosary. From such power this thing could simply turn into dust. Zhao Zixin couldn't believe his eyes what this fool was doing, because the rosary is the key to getting this piece of land, which is what he wants to do. The temple abbot was also surprised. Was this guy really not like Jia Fei at all? Perhaps the elderly man was mistaken from the very beginning. At some point, the beads began to crack. After all, the impact of such an amount of energy cannot pass without leaving a trace. They are about to break. Literally a second later, there was a loud explosion. Everything around was covered with a large cloud of dust. Everyone present tried to understand what had happened. Still, the guy broke them. He apologized and tried to pretend that this did not happen at all at his request, just a coincidence. Literally one carelessness, and the rosary crumbled, and apparently, Feng Shao decided that leaving the children under the supervision of a monk would be the best solution. The children did not want to leave, because then the temple would be left without their support. Zhao Zixin was shocked. How could he do this? And now we need to change the terms of the deal. Shizhen Sha realized that Bro acted for the sake of the future of the children, and now the bets are void and the Yellow Tigers have lost their trophy. Now that the trophy is gone, bets will have to be void, and in fact, his conditions became impossible to fulfill. The Yellow Tigers seem to have gone crazy, and now they will have to deal with debts and taxes without shelter. Nian Bohua asked the ritual distribution leader, even if he changed the conditions, would he be able to defeat this guy? And the man was offended. Even the witness did not believe in him. Joy filled Zhang and Shenhua when the problem was resolved, and the result was probably better than they imagined, and it was decided that the children would remain in the temple. Feng Shao assumed that the temple abbot would no longer want to communicate with him, and in fact, he had a negative impression of the hero, and everyone was preparing to leave. However, the monk suddenly asked him to wait, and before leaving, he expressed his desire to talk privately with Feng Shao and his girlfriend, and apparently, the old man realized that he was mistaken and made hasty conclusions. There was nothing strange in the fact that he wanted to discuss something with the guy, and however, the girl's appearance seemed unexpected, and she didn't even witness what was happening and just came to the company. But at this time, it was already late at night, and in the temple, Zhao Zixin continued to express his dissatisfaction with what had happened. He didn't understand why Nian Bo wouldn't make any attempts to stop what was happening, and after all, she witnessed the spread of rituals. But the woman didn't pay much attention to it, and why did this fool decide to teach her how to do business, and in general, this was not part of her duties. Nian Bo was more interested in Feng Zhao's mysterious power, and she realized that this was just the beginning, and many interesting things awaited them ahead. At this time, in the abbot's room, he and two guests sat down at the table, preparing to discuss important matters, and I even prepared tea. The old man asked not to hold a grudge and suggested drinking tea, claiming that this would help them calm down and their conversation would become more pleasant. Suddenly, the hero began to experience severe pain in his head, and could it be the consequences of the blow he missed? But the wound was only superficial. The friend worriedly asked what happened to him and how he was feeling, and the guy assured that everything was fine, noting that fatigue was just starting to make itself felt. The temple abbot lowered his head and sincerely apologized for what happened recently in the battle where he injured Feng Shao, and he admitted his mistake and repented. From the expression on the guy's face, it was clear that he didn't hold a grudge against the monk, and the hero also apologized for the trick with the wine bottle and for everything else. The old man also expressed his gratitude to Feng Shao for destroying the rosary and solving the situation with the orphanage, and actually it was his responsibility, but the guy took it upon himself instead of the abbot. As a token of gratitude, the monk expressed his desire to share all the information he knew about a man named Jia Fei, and he himself wanted to talk about this with someone. Feng Shao was excited, and maybe this is the same guy who caused the horror 7 years ago, and the hero all this time tried to at least find out something about him. As it turned out, during the second Crimson Night 2 years ago, Jia Fei stayed overnight in the monastery, and later the monk found out that the guy had come with the intention of murder. During their conversation, one contradiction became clear, and his soul was full of anger, but the man himself was gentle and modest in communicating with people. He looked respectable, but there was an aura of death around him, and without other options, the monk tried to stop him, but he failed. The old man was defeated by just one blow, and the abbot still blames himself for his lack of strength and lack of determination at that moment. Jia Fei brought the children from the welfare orphanage to the temple to sacrifice just one person, which later became known as the Second Crimson Night. Shenhua, having heard about the only victim, immediately understood what was going on and asked the master if her grandfather was really the same victim that night. The monk confirmed this guess, and the former seer of the Black Warrior current, Shen Yun, died in a fire 2 years ago, and it was he who was the main target. The girl immediately began to cry, and all her life she believed that her grandfather's death was just an accident and that he was a good man. In his entire life, he had never harmed anyone, and Shanhua could not understand why they did this to him, and she didn't want to cry in front of everyone and ran out into the fresh air. Meanwhile, the monk asked the hero how he managed to find out that this man was visiting a monastery, and Tariq always thought that only he knew about it. Fang Xiao told the old man a story that happened 7 years ago, and Jia Fei killed Fang Zhao's loved ones, and all these years the guy was looking for him. He diligently collected information, searched everywhere, including data from large groups, and despite the lack of cultivation, the hero learned a lot on this topic. But despite countless searches, the guy could not find anything related to his former friend. However, his phone suddenly showed signs of life, and he received an email from an unknown address. It turned out that the sender was a great snake named Hao Shi, and the hero never met him personally, but heard about him. The message said that the person Fang Xiao was looking for visited this temple. That is why the abbot of the monastery became his only hope, all the information found over 7 years. The elderly man told everything he knew, and added that he gave the guy a small jade figurine, hoping for his reform, and however, Jia Fei disappeared without a trace after that. The monk doesn't understand why Fang Xiao still wants to save this orphanage even after losing his only clue. Perhaps he does not want his children to repeat his fate, because living for the purpose of revenge is not the best choice. Children left homeless still love this corner of the earth, and I am already disappointed in people and in myself. However, after hearing the guy's answer, he calmed down and new hope appeared, and Tariq felt alive again. There is always hope somewhere in the world, and the abbot decided to look for it by traveling to different places. Therefore, he decides to transfer the land of the orphanage into the hands of the hero, convinced that Fang Xiao can take on this responsibility with dignity. The monk hopes that when Fang Xiao is faced with his own hatred, he will remember the current feeling and make the right decision. The conversation continued for several hours, and it was already dawn when the door finally opened and Fang Xiao came out. Everyone else took notice as they waited a long time for him to appear, not expecting it to take so long. The hero announced that he was now taking on the responsibilities associated with the shelter of well-being, and this was the decision of the personal initiative of the abbot of the temple. Zhao Zixin disagrees with this and expresses his dissatisfaction, arguing that they should have discussed this matter and the dispute, in his opinion, was not annulled. The hero refuses to listen to this argument and suggests not to waste time on discussion, suggesting that Zhao Zixin take the land by force if he so insists. The leader of the rituals does not even try to use force, realizing that he has no chance, and he changes his behavior but refuses to use force on others. The woman is tired of waiting, and since the issue with the shelter has been resolved, she seeks to leave the place, and Zhao Zixin, leaving, threatens to return sooner or later. He also asks to convey these words to the monk, showing stubbornness despite the fact that he understands that he will not be able to obtain the land. Shizhen Shah asked his brother what plans he had for the destroyed orphanage, suggesting that the hero would likely try to rebuild it. The leader of the Yellow Tigers was impressed with his new ally, and he wondered if this guy was ready to take on the responsibility of restoring and caring for the children. The members of the Yellow Tiger clan promised that their group would certainly support Fang Xiao, aware of his feelings and willingness to help in whatever way they could. The hero expressed gratitude for the support, and at the first meeting, he had no idea that they would turn out to be such kind people. At first, they seemed like ordinary bandits. This amused all the clan members very much, because at the first meeting their plans were to simply beat the hero and throw him away. But until now, it was not clear where Shanhua was, and from the moment she cried and ran away from the building, no one had seen her, and it was necessary to find her as soon as possible. The girl was not far away, climbed onto the roof of one of the buildings and thought, sitting in this position for several hours, watching the dawn. Suddenly her new friend joined her, and she was surprised because she didn't expect anyone to look for her, and finding this place was not easy. Xinhua believed all her life that her grandfather would always be by her side, and he had to see her get married and become a mother because he was her only relative. That's why she refused to accept his death for so long. Every day the girl drank to forget this pain. At the moment, Xinhua thought that her pain had subsided, but when the abbot told her that her grandfather had been killed, memories flooded her and she realized that she was still not ready for this. After these words, Xinhua could not help but cry, and her feelings were understandable because her parents never showed concern for her, and now she was left completely alone. Feng Xiao listened carefully to her story, and when the girl finished, he asked if she understood why he told her about the system of appealing to the gods. His girlfriend didn't quite understand what he was talking about, and Xinhua believed that it was all an accident because he met her in a bar by chance. However, it turned out that the hero had previously investigated the new Crimson Knight and learned that she was the granddaughter of the man who died in that incident. This was an important element in solving the mystery, and in addition, Feng Xiao told her about his spirit so that she would believe him and join the proceedings around the monastery. Xinhua asked her friend if he was afraid of getting too close to the truth, because perhaps there were dangerous people behind it who could harm him. But the guy expressed confidence in his decision, and a very important person to him once told him words that Feng Xiao remembered for the rest of his life. Many years ago, when the hero was still a child, his little friend was injured, and he had to carry her in his arms to the orphanage. He asked her if she was in too much pain, seeing the tears in her eyes, and the girl replied that only fools cry over such little things. These real handsome guys just continue to move forward laughing. For the first time in a long time, the guy had a smile, and these warm memories filled him with joy, and he remembered how carefree and joyful childhood could be. His girlfriend laughed a little, and only a small child could say such words, and unfortunately, real life is much more complicated, and he honestly doesn't know how to calm people down. She turned out to be right, and this phrase was said by a little girl who, unfortunately, was no longer destined to become an adult. Xinhua did not expect such an answer, and I thought that this was said by some mentor of his or someone who taught him how to contact the gods, but it turned out that it was his little girlfriend. After that, they sat silently for several minutes, and suddenly the guy approached Xinhua with a proposal. He asked his girlfriend to go with him to the ruins of the welfare shelter, and together they must find out the truth about that night. The girl immediately agreed, and now she too seeks to find out the truth, and all the people who harmed her grandfather must be punished. Nian Bohua stood nearby all this time and eavesdropped on their conversation, and I was very curious what this guy was going to do next. After some time they came to the place where the second Crimson Night took place 2 years ago, but will they be able to find any evidence? Xinhua felt great emotion as she stood at the spot where her close relative died, and she had previously hesitated to return here, but now she had support. The building was completely burned out, the walls were destroyed, and everything inside was covered with ash. And at first glance it seemed impossible to find any traces here. Not knowing where to start searching, the hero spent half a day on the way here, but never developed a plan, and Feng Xiao made a decision while they were sitting on the roof. The first thing he noticed was the material of the walls, and perhaps all the shelters in the country were so similar to each other. This building was identical to the one in which he almost died 7 years ago, and I guess they were all built according to the same project. Xinhua had no idea about the first Hog Night, so she could not see the connection between these two events, and all she could do was guess. Suddenly, a woman's voice addressed them, and from the beginning it was not clear where the voice was coming from, and the woman scolded the girl, causing irritation. It turned out to be Nian Bohua, who was hiding nearby and eavesdropping on their conversation, and Xinhua was very annoyed, considering her pathetic. Feng Xiao was not happy about her presence, and it's possible she overheard their conversation and is now keeping an eye on them, no matter what she's up to. However, if she was going to attack, she would have done it a long time ago, and besides, Nian Bohua herself revealed her disguise. The woman noticed that the girl was angry, so she asked her to calm down, emphasizing that she did not come here to compete over the guy. Xinhua flushed at these words, and why is this old woman even here? and it was none of her business. The girl could not restrain herself and attacked Nien Bo Hua, activating her technique with the intention of putting this woman in her place. Her friend did not expect such a reaction and did not have time to intervene, and didn't she tell him to calm down, and then we don't even know how strong their opponent is. Nien Bo Hua easily dodged the blow, ending up directly above Xinhua, and she activated her technique. This ability resembled several pink snakes, and because of the advantage in position, her attack was perfect. As a result, the girl was completely paralyzed. She could not even move a finger, and her skin began to turn into stone. She could only look around helplessly, and it was only now that Xinhua realized that her actions were extremely impulsive. A woman came up from behind and praised him for his activity, but reminded him of the danger that could lurk around every corner. Immediately after this, Fang Xiao grabbed Nien Bo Hua's hand and demanded to let his girlfriend go, and he had a crystal in his hands, which meant that at any moment he could turn to the gods. The woman listened to his words and instantly abandoned the use of her techniques, and the girl finally regained control of her body, but did not have time to recover in time and fell to the ground. Nien Bo Hua asked not to reproach her too much, considering that his girlfriend was the first to start the fight, and all she could do was defend herself, because she couldn't just stand and watch. First the guy helped Xinhua to her feet, and next time she should have thought better about her actions before getting involved in such brawls. The hero asked the woman if she had come here to witness the agreement between the two gangs, and why she had to follow them so far. Zhao Zixin even felt a little offended, and maybe he really thought that she was interested in a showdown between weaklings. In reality, she was acting on instructions from her superiors, and is tasked with finding out the circumstances surrounding the death of the previous seer Shen Yun. But the leadership of the White Tigers 2 years ago came to the conclusion that it was an accident, and why did they now need a new check? However, it turned out that the group's leaders probably chose not to disclose the details of the second Crimson Night, deciding that it was easier to attribute everything to an accidental fire. Now they had to go inside and find out whether the so-called investigation was carried out, or whether it was just a fabrication. Nien Bo Hua had an accurate 3D map of this place with her before the fire, and when they went inside, the building was completely destroyed, and at first glance there were no traces that could help in the investigation. Thanks to the building model, the place where Shen Yun's body was discovered became visible. Everything around was so destroyed that it was difficult to even determine this place. Suddenly, something caught Fang Zhao's attention, and the guy stopped for a moment, entering one of the rooms, and there was no ceiling above it, but it interested him greatly. The room looked exactly like the one where he himself almost died several years ago, and the location was absolutely identical. The hero seemed to return 7 years ago, and terrible scenes began to emerge in his memories of that night, and in the ruins he noticed some strange object. Fang Xiao immediately remembered the monk's words that the old man gave Jia Fei a small Buddha statue in the hope that the guy would change, but this did not happen. And there she was, a little jade thing on a red rope, and it seemed as if someone had left it here on purpose. When the guy tried to take it in his hands, something strange began, and the figure began to glow red, and the guy himself seemed to cease to exist in this world. Xinhua immediately noticed this and hurried to help her friend, and he almost lost consciousness, and the girl did everything possible. But, unfortunately, she was unable to make it in time, and now Fang Xiao seemed to be falling down. Apparently this thing that Jia Fei left here was intended specifically for him. It is difficult to say how long this lasted, because time and space were greatly distorted at that moment, and the hero could only helplessly fall deeper and deeper. After some time, he finally landed on an unidentified surface, with a tiny Buddha statue remaining in his hands. Having recovered a little, the guy tried to get to his feet, and the place turned out to be completely unfamiliar to him, and the question of how he ended up here became a mystery to him. Representing a deep cave with unusual walls, the place was illuminated only by one powerful beam of light penetrating through a hole in the ceiling. Upon closer inspection, one could notice that all the walls were decorated with huge statues of various gods. In the very center there was a small pedestal, onto which a stream of sunlight was directed, and this item probably had special meaning. Fan Xiao came closer, trying to solve this riddle, but at first glance, nothing intelligible came to his mind, and it seemed like some kind of puzzle. The slab resembled a flat board for a board game, on which 4 square stones with hieroglyphs were carved. Suddenly Zhang came up behind him and asked the guy if he was familiar with this place, or if he thought he had never seen it before. From the expression on the hero's face, it became clear that he had no idea where they were now, and this cave was completely unfamiliar to him, and he asked his assistant about the location. Suddenly the spirit put his hand on his shoulder, and this time it was already material, and this was the first time Fang Xiao saw him not in his spirit form. As it turns out, the guy is unconscious in the real world, and this place represents his subconscious, the material embodiment of the system of appealing to the gods. In this dungeon, they exist the same way as in normal space. The hero looked a little scared, and why exactly now did he find himself in this cave? And perhaps the influence of the amulet he picked up. 7 years ago, Zhang pulled him out from under the rubble of a destroyed orphanage, and since then they have not parted, and however, Fang Xiao never asked about one thing. Why was he chosen by the spirit as the heir to the system of appealing to the gods, and how did he deserve such an honor? The system of appealing to the gods has already changed many owners, but the selection criteria remain a mystery, and Zhang simply senses when the heir is nearby. This choice seems rather arbitrary, but perhaps the location of the dungeon in his subconscious was known from the very beginning, and however, activation required a key. It turned out that the dungeon was in his subconscious from the very beginning, but a key was required to enter. And as soon as the guy took it in his hands, the spirit immediately felt the presence of the missing element. Indeed, this small Buddha figurine turned out to be the key to the embodiment of the system of appealing to the gods, and now she was in the guy's hands. In the real world, Fang Xiao's body stood motionless, his hand still holding the amulet, creating an eerie impression. His friend was very worried and wanted to help, but, unfortunately, she did not know how to do this, and the girl had never encountered anything like this before. A strange dark red stream of energy soon entered the ruined orphanage, and Nian Bo Hua sensed its presence. The energy turned out to be unusually powerful and was completely different from the spiritual powers of cultivators, and it was something unique. What could this little thing hide in itself, and how did she contain such an amount of power? The hero assumed that a former comrade left him a jade figurine of Buddha, but why did he enhance the abilities of a person seeking revenge on him? It was this amulet that opened a new level of the system of appealing to the gods and activated the dungeon, and the jade figurine had to be placed on the central rod of the god system. As soon as Fang Xiao brought the key to the stove, it escaped from his hands and independently headed to the right place. The amulet hung in the air. Numerous black and red lightning burst out from it, as if energy was bursting out. After a few seconds, it became clear that the slab was drawing out this unusual energy from the jade figurine and absorbing it. Suddenly, something began to happen on the core of the god system. A pink glow appeared above the 2 square figures. The energy of the jade Buddha completely absorbed the slab, thanks to which a new element appeared on it. This element was different from the other 4, and it was twice as large and had a different color, glowing with a bright pink glow. The god system contained card abilities that required keys to unlock them, and before this, Fang Xiao could only use the Star of Destiny, but now he has another ability. Force Majeure could greatly enhance old cards, and Zhang's ability also applied to these cards, and moreover, it was one of the rarest and most powerful abilities. The guy didn't even seem to pay attention to this. He was interested in the fact that there were still 5 blocked slots left on the plate, and this means he can become even stronger. He was interested in the question, and if all the slots were filled, would he be able to summon the dragon god to fulfill wishes? And however, Zhang said that this system does not have such a function. No one has ever unlocked all the cells, and if the hero wants to find out what power can be obtained after this, he needs to collect all the keys. But this is a long way off, and Fang Xiao asked if he could try out his new card called Irresistible Force right now. This is, of course, possible, but you need to remember that the Star of Destiny only requires the cheapest green crystal, and the Force Majeure already requires a purple stone. Soul crystals are usually bought for money. They can be both expensive and cheap, and the value of each crystal increases 10 times compared to the previous one, and the purple crystal takes third place in the hierarchy. Initially, one blue crystal cost the same as 10 green ones. The guy tried to evaluate everything in terms of portions of rice with meat because he was very poor, and is there really no way to get these crystals cheaper? Zhang told him that if he has no money, then let him go to work, and there is nothing to trade, and moreover, he has not yet told the most important thing. The hero instantly became attentive, and he thought he had it all figured out, but something seemed to be eluding him. The value of the new card lay not only in the cost of its activation, but also everything turned out to be much more difficult. Now that he had unlocked a new ability, he needed to meet certain conditions to use the skill. The conditions were to fill the scale with numerical values, and this could be done in several ways. The first method is related to dungeons, but it was too early to talk about it, and the second method was easier. You had to fight and win fights with master cultivators. For 7 years, the guy defeated many, including a fairly strong master, and the remuneration was appropriate. The strength of his card increased by 35% after this fight, but the next level of skills was still far away, and more battles awaited him in the future. The entire conversation was only about his first card, and the new ability had much more stringent requirements. If Fang Xiao fails to deal with her, the consequences will be extremely serious, even to the point of death. The guy started to get nervous, sweat started to appear on his face, and within himself he made a choice whether to risk himself. He didn't really have a choice. If Jia Fei could defeat the temple abbot with one blow, that meant he was extremely strong. Fang Xiao cannot remain weak, and unless he becomes stronger, he will never be able to defeat his former comrade. To achieve justice and revenge for the murder of his sister, he needs to take this step. After a few seconds, he replied to Zhang that he had to try, and this was the shortest path to obtaining enormous power. The spirit was pleased with this answer. He did not expect anything less, and now they could talk about the second way to fill the skill bar. To do this, one had to go into a dungeon simulation, and Zhang changed the appearance of his hand and pointed his finger at the hero's forehead, and he instantly moved to another location. This space was reminiscent of space, limitless and without frames. Various cards with images of spirits were spread out in front of Fang Xiao. The guy, without hesitation, grabbed the nearest one, and this should have been enough to begin with. After he took the card, the others instantly disappeared. Fang Xiao turned around and was deeply surprised. Perhaps it was fate, and the duh he summoned turned out to be the real incarnation of Zhang, and the accident is truly amazing, because everything happened by chance. This was his true form, a tall, large man with bright red hair, his entire figure covered in armor. The hero's hand also began to become covered with similar matter, and he felt a huge force burst out of the card, practically materializing. Flames burst out from under the red armor from time to time, but at first glance it might seem that there were only changes in the acquisition of power. But suddenly Fang Xiao felt a sharp pain all over his body, and he had never experienced anything like this before. The ground disappeared from under his feet. It brought him to his knees, and he clenched his teeth, and perhaps this was the price for new abilities. Power literally burst out of his body, as if it was trying to escape and escape. And does this card really have such a strong effect on his body? This power has exceeded the limits of the hero, and in the future he should only undertake what he can handle, and Arnie should be more careful. Zhang invites them to stop, says that's enough for today, and however, Fang Xiao does not agree and asks to wait a little, and I have something to ask. The spirit is surprised, and he knows that the guy is now experiencing the greatest pain of his life. He is covered in sweat, breathing heavily, but Fang Xiao is not going to retreat. The hero wants to know why this small Buddha statue became the key and how it is connected to Jia Fei. Zhang explains that any object can become a key. All you need is the proximity of fortitude, and as for the jade figurine, the spirit itself does not know why this particular thing became the key. After this, Feng Xiao finds himself back in his real world, and now he has to look for answers to all his questions on his own. As soon as the guy finds himself in a familiar place, he immediately grabs his stomach, and the pain still hasn't subsided, and he feels like he might lose consciousness. There is blood coming out of his mouth, and he tries to cover himself with his hand, but there is too much blood. Shenhua runs towards him and helps him stand on his feet, and he is very worried about his friend and asks what happened to him. Feng Xiao can't answer this question, and it takes him a long time to come to his senses, and there is a lot of pain. The pain subsides slightly, but still prevents me from moving. Nian Bohua watched everything that was happening, looking quite calm, and she just said that it had finally happened. She added that the guy is young, and his body will definitely withstand it, and the blood will soon dry up, but now he has gained new strength. Shenhua got angry at Nian Bohua, not understanding how she could be so frivolous, and the girl clearly saw how the hero touched this thing, and something bad happened. But, in fact, when a person thirsting for power spits blood, this may mean that he has found a source that is overflowing with it. Feng Xiao asked his friend not to worry about him, and he came to his senses a little and promised that everything would be okay with him. Soon the guy got to his feet, tried to wipe the blood from his face, and with his expression he wanted to show that what had happened was just a trifle. However, he looked bad, and nevertheless, he suggested continuing the search for some evidence. Shenhua also noticed this, and she didn't want to continue the investigation when her friend was spitting blood, and it was definitely not trifles. Their conversation was interrupted by Nian Bohua, passing between them, and she said that if a guy claims that everything is fine, then there is no reason to worry, and since they came here, they need to finish the job. The woman walked towards the center of the room, seemingly noticing something, and however, the hero and Shenhua did not quite understand what she wanted to do now. Using her technique again, she spawned small purple snakes from her spiritual energy. Soon, several snakes appeared, serving to identify traces of the cultivators after their collisions. This method helped to identify whether there had been skirmishes in the past, and even after decades, there was always at least a tiny trace of special power. Either Mr. Shan Yun died voluntarily, or he was killed instantly, and thus, the fire 2 years ago is probably not the cause of death, and the second wild night only covered up the traces. Shenhua couldn't believe her ears, and could it be that someone killed her grandfather? But why would someone do such a terrible thing? Moreover, her relative was at the astral body stage, one step away from completing the last level of Qi, and there was no one in this world who could kill him instantly. Suddenly she thought that when she talked to the abbot, Nian Bohua was not there, and how could this woman be sure that Shen Yun was killed? Nian Bohua simply described what she saw using her technique, and an investigation of the scene of the incident indicated only these two versions. 2 years have passed, and the evidence has become less and less, and moreover, it is impossible to know whether Mr. Shan Yun survived, and suddenly a ray of hope appeared in Shenhua's heart, and maybe her grandfather is still alive. One day he taught her one secret technique. With its help it was possible to see pictures of the past, and but for a person to be able to use such a tool, his strength had to be enormous. The guy was amazed, because he had never heard of such a technique before, and the woman, although she knew about it, noted that blood from the Shin family was needed to complete it. But that was only the superficial part, and in reality, this technique could upset the natural balance, requiring near-divine strength to maintain this condition. In case of a mistake, all the energy could turn against the performer and immediately absorb him, and to perform such a trick required careful consideration of each step. Nian Bohua asked Shenhua if she was ready to take the risk, because if she failed, it could end extremely sadly, and an entire life was at stake. It was clear from the expression on the girl's face that she did not have the slightest doubt, and to find out the truth about her grandfather's death, she was ready to risk her life every day. Suddenly, Feng Xiao asked her to teach him this technique so that he could perform this trick, and despite his girlfriend's decisive mood, it seemed to him that it was best if he did it. Xinhua felt sorry for her friend, and just a few minutes ago he was in pain and coughing up blood, and why does he need to do this? And she thought he should have taken better care of his health. However, the guy assured that he had already fully recovered, and he reminded her of his unique ability to communicate with the gods and insisted that he would cope with this task with a bang. Ultimately, it was decided that Feng Xiao would take over the execution of this technique, and the guy stepped forward and was about to use the green crystal to activate his special ability. Unfortunately, now he could not use his new power, since he did not have the valuable purple crystal with him, and however, this time he had to be content with an ordinary card. All these difficulties were just temporary tests, and soon he will be able to master new abilities and strengthen his strength, and at the moment, the hero has summoned his spirit named Zhang. After this, the guy asked his girlfriend to come closer, because right now she had to complete her part of the task. Xinhua immediately understood what was required of her, and bit her thumb, and the blood quickly began to flow out, and without this component, the use of technology would have been impossible. The next moment, the energy coming from Feng Xiao mixed with the blood of his girlfriend, and everything seemed to be going according to plan, but the risks remained significant, and at any moment everything could be disrupted. This technique turned out to be extremely difficult, and its successful implementation required maximum diligence and dedication, and it was impossible to be separated from events for even a second. At some point, Xinhua began to feel unwell, and the breathing became heavy, and the face became covered with sweat, and she seemed to have lost too much blood and began to lose consciousness. The hero was completely absorbed in the process, and he realized that any failure in the plan could end his existence. Suddenly, the guy discovered that his girlfriend had lost consciousness and the woman supported her to sit down, but it was difficult to determine what the consequences would be. Feng Xiao shouted to her in the hope that she would come to her senses and be able to answer, and at this moment, the special technique was almost completed, and the energy took on a red hue. Suddenly, the guy disappeared, and along with him, all the spiritual power he used to implement this method disappeared. For a few seconds the hero lost his orientation in space, but soon opened his eyes and looked around, and there were sparks in the ride and it was hot, just like that night many years ago. The first thing that caught his eye was the blade of the knife pointed straight at him, but what could that mean? And perhaps he made a mistake in performing the technique, and now death awaits him. The man with the knife turned out to be his former friend, but his appearance had changed over the years, and he was difficult to recognize. A fire broke out around, and obviously, the technique worked, and Feng Xiao could now see the past events of 2 years ago. But what does it all mean, and why is Jia Fei standing in front of him with a knife threatening him? And the situation was tense and unclear, and it was difficult to predict what would happen next. Suddenly, the hooded man ordered the one standing in front of him to die, and the hero got scared, and it is possible that he is physically in the past. The attack was incredibly fast and powerful, and the guy was very close, and there was no chance of going back, and this might be the end of everything. Fortunately, he ended up in this world as a spirit, and no one saw him and could not harm him, and if it weren't for this, he would probably die right now. However, in this world, Jia Fei pierced him with his gaze and moved on, and all that remained was to understand who his real target was. The guy in the hood was moving at incredible speed, and as soon as the hero turned his head, he was already next to the one he was going to kill. This person turned out to be Shen Yun, and for some reason the old man didn't even try to dodge, and he just stood still and watched. Jia Fei was also amazed by this behavior, and why doesn't the old man resist? And why is he behaving so strangely? The blade stopped a few millimeters from the master's neck, and it seems that the guy didn't want to get an easy victory, and perhaps taking the life of someone who does not resist seemed boring to him. Shen Yun explained his behavior by saying that he could not respond with an attack, and the guy in front of him turned out to be an orphan from a welfare orphanage. But how did Shen Yun know about Jia Fei's childhood in the orphanage, and Feng Xiao tried to understand how these two people were connected, because they spent their entire childhood with him. But the hero had never met the master before, and how did the old man find out about him? And Jia Fei's smile indicated that he was having fun, being exposed, but still coming. For some reason, all the events related to the orphans popped up in Shen Yun's head. The old man knew that sooner or later this moment would come, and this man would kill him, after which he would burn in fire, and this suited him. The master only hoped that Jia Fei would complete everything on him and stop his actions, and after all, revenge is a bad thing. Fang Xiao closely followed their conversation, but was still unable to figure out what exactly they were talking about, and what place and event were they discussing, and why did his former comrade so persistently strive for the death of someone. Suddenly the hooded guy returned his knife to its sheath, and the blade disappeared, but why did he need to put away the weapon? Now his hands were free, and is he going to fight with his fists? The next moment, Jia Fei instantly moved close to the master, while Shen Yun continued to stand in place, and the man was ready to accept his death. But despite this, he could not expect that his departure from this world would be so cruel, and it seemed that his opponent was a real beast. Perhaps the old man thought that he was destined to die a calm and quiet death, but Jia Fei had something more amazing in store for him. Without techniques or weapons, he pierced the master's chest right in the heart area with his bare hands. His physical strength was amazing. A second later, he grabbed Shen Yun's heart with his hand. Then, with maximum force, he pulled back, and the master's heart was in his hands, continuing to beat for a few more seconds. The hero was shocked by what he saw, and he had never had to deal with such a brutal act before, and this person did it for his own pleasure. Looks like it was true. Jia Fei didn't even try to hide his joy as Shen Yun's heart continued to beat in his hands while the man died right in front of his eyes. A few seconds later it was all over, and the guy in the hood continued to smile and be glad that he managed to carry out his plans. With the help of an unknown force, he set fire to the heart that remained in his hands, declaring that all people must die. Fang Xiao still couldn't get used to what was happening, and what happened to this man whom he knew since childhood, and what events led him to such a brutal entity. Suddenly, Fang Xiao turned around and asked the guy who seemed to be following him, and apparently, this person somehow recognized a special technique. Fang Xiao felt that a person with such strength was able to understand many things, and the anger in his heart haunted him, and he was about to hit his former friend with all his might. The guy also ordered him to answer the question of why he does all these terrible things, why he needs to kill so many people. Jia Fei didn't even dodge this blow, and he just stood there, expecting that the fist would soon hit him in the head. But it should be remembered that this is a dream world, and they cannot harm each other, and this was the law of this universe. What the hero saw was just the past, and he won't be able to change anything here. Fang Xiao was aware of this, but his rage did not allow him to simply stand and watch, and he felt he had an obligation to at least try. In fact, the guy was in the future, viewing the illusion of what happened here, and Jia Fei did not see him, but only felt his presence. The hero was also just an observer. Powerlessness overwhelmed him, because it was impossible to change the past, and Fang Xiao felt how his strength was insufficient. However, it turned out that his former friend would give him another chance. 2 years later, he was going to appear in the city center, where a celebration was taking place in honor of the new year. These words filled the guy with horror. And what is this psychopath up to? And does he intend to kill people just for fun? This turned out to be true, and Jia Fei admitted that he was going to destroy all the inhabitants of the north under the rule of the Black Warrior. If Fang Xiao has any objections, he should come and try to stop him, unless of course he is afraid. In addition, if the guy could resist him, his former friend promised to tell him an important and interesting secret. Hatred for this man filled the hero, and can he prevent this? Because if his strength is not enough, Jia Fei will take the lives of many innocent people. A former friend asked the guy about the similarity of today's fire with what happened then. It was at this moment that Jia Fei left his jade amulet on the destroyed beam of the orphanage, and now there was no doubt that it was he who filled him with that strange energy. Fang Xiao tried to stop him, and the guy had not yet learned everything from this man, and he was afraid that he would not have such a chance again. But the cruel man did not listen to him and simply left, and the hero could only look at his slowly disappearing silhouette through his fingers. The illusion should have dissipated at this moment, but it turned out that even after successfully entering the past, someone who is in another world can become confused in their memories. Because of this, there is a risk of losing yourself, and it is for this reason that Feng Xiao suddenly finds himself in the memories of 7 years ago. For the second time, he experiences those events, and the guy shouts again to his former friend and orders him to stop. And again a heavy stone falls on his head, rendering him completely powerless. Feng Xiao remains completely powerless and prepares to accept his death. The orphanage burns with the same bright flames as that night 7 years ago, and the smoke rises exactly as high. A huge piece falling from the ceiling was about to finish him off completely. But just when Feng Xiao was ready to go to God, Zhang suddenly appeared, saving him from his inevitable fate at the last moment. The guy didn't know who it was or why he was there, but it immediately became clear that the man had enormous strength, easily throwing a huge piece of the building. That thing flew several tens of meters, and it was obvious that an ordinary fighter could not have achieved this, and this was on a completely different level. With the same ease, Zhang lifted the stone lying on Feng Xiao's body, and somehow the spirit led him to this place at the right time. At first glance, the hero was unconscious, but suddenly his eyes lit up with a red flame, indicating that he was not ready to die, and he had unfulfilled tasks in this world. The spirit advised him to cast aside his doubts and follow him, promising survival and unique strength. After these memories, Feng Xiao finally came to his senses, and now he needed to figure out where he was and whether he had lost his mind. The thought of a possible loss of reason greatly frightened the hero, causing him to suddenly jump to his feet. His girlfriend was scared, glad that he woke up, but surprised by his strange behavior. Fortunately, everything was in order, and they moved calmly on the train, not anticipating any trouble. Thanks to the memories of how Zhang saved the hero, he was able to preserve his true essence in this world and illusions. It's funny to realize that the spirit once again saved his life, and the man expressed gratitude, realizing that perhaps his words would not reach the spirit. Suddenly Shenhua started taking her friend's temperature, and his strange behavior was understandable given what had happened to him earlier. I had to stop smiling stupidly. It seemed that the magic circle had completely burned his brains, but the girl did not need to worry. Feng Xiao remained himself. The guy asked his girlfriend how they ended up on the train. The last thing he remembered in the present was entering that portal. Shenhua's answer surprised him, and it turns out that he himself headed to a city called Nando. Having emerged from the magic circle on his own, he looked exhausted and wounded, as if he was about to lose consciousness. The girl regained her balance, and fortunately she was not seriously injured, and Shenhua was glad that Feng Xiao had returned. Suddenly the hero collapsed to the ground, and he only had enough strength to say that they urgently needed to go to another city. After that, he lay unconscious for 3 whole days, and Shenhua suggested that a trip to Nando could save him, and together with Nian Bohua they brought him here. The girl really wanted to know what the hero finally saw in the illusion of the past, and whether there was still a chance that her grandfather was alive. Unfortunately, the hero did not have good news on this matter, and he clenched his teeth and could not focus on anything except Jia Fei. Why destroy the inhabitants of the north, and what secret does the Crimson Knight hide, and how the hero was able to predict it 2 years ago? Shenhua noticed that something was wrong with her friend. He looked very restless, and I tried to find out what he was thinking about now. Feng Xiao decided that it was better not to tell his friend about what happened, and he told her that the city they were going to had answers to all her questions. The girl noticed that he was hiding something, but decided not to bother him now, and after all, he already got it. After 3 days of sleep, the guy was probably very hungry, and Shenhua decided to go to the buffet and buy him ramen. However, as soon as she stood up from her seat, she immediately ran into a tall man. The man looked strange and serious, as if he had not even noticed the girl right away, and Shenhua forcefully returned to her place. But the man still noticed her, and he turned around slowly and apologized, looking rather gloomy. He had round glasses and a dark jacket, and then, as if nothing had happened, he went on about his business. The man headed to the next carriage, where Nien Bohua was now, and it seemed like they were having a business conversation. He sat down next to the woman and said that the minister wanted to know whether the task of finding the necessary target had been completed. Prickly Boar, as he was called, belonged to an unknown organization, and no one knew his real name. Nien Bohua's call sign was Great Snake, and he found it funny that this man was asking him this, considering that he had always been successful in achieving his goals. If the minister is so worried, he can personally come and find out firsthand. The prickly boar was not inclined to talk, and therefore, when the information was transmitted, he hurried to leave. Before leaving, he said one thing, and the minister adores Nien Bohua. But if a woman disrespects him, his hand will not waver, and he will definitely punish her. After this, the prickly boar calmly left, and that man was really gloomy. Even such a confident woman as Nien Bohua was a little nervous, and the look on her face testified to her excitement, and sometimes men can act rather strangely. While Feng Xiao and his girlfriend were in the carriage, a loud sound was heard, but in fact, it was just a guy who sneezed. Apparently the ramen was too spicy, Shenhua thought, and the guy tried to justify himself, saying that he was suddenly remembered. The girl knew who could be thinking about her friend at the moment, and took out a photograph from her secret pocket. While the hero was still unconscious, they asked to give him a photo, and work to restore the shelter from the yellow tigers has already begun, and all the guys were very happy. The photo was captioned, and everyone wished good luck to the brother and sister on their journey, and the abbot, by the way, announced that he was about to travel to the west. And yet, Nien Bohua offered to take Feng Xiao with her to the supervision department to report to higher-ups, and this was necessary so that they could move freely around the country. Feng Xiao completely agreed. He was even happy, as he wanted to visit the supervision department, and perhaps there will be additional clues there. Regarding this, the guy asked where the woman had gone, and she hasn't been around for a long time. As it turned out, she went to the restaurant carriage, because beautiful girls should maintain a stylish life, and left them both to gorge themselves on custard noodles. This, by the way, caused some discontent, and couldn't she invite them with her, and in fact, apparently, she had enough funds. Suddenly the door behind them swung open, and they didn't think that it was Nien Bohua who was returning. But it turned out that these were young people who introduced themselves as a tax collection squad, and the crowd was noisy and ordered everyone to disperse. The heroes began to whisper, but it turned out that none of them knew who they were, but at first glance they looked quite stern. A woman's voice reached them from behind the seat in front, and the girl told them that this was the tax collection squad of the finance department, responsible for collecting crystals during the Black Warrior. The finance department and the compliance department were considered mortal enemies, and it was better not to talk about it too often, so as not to get into trouble. Shenhua was a little embarrassed, and I guess she heard all their conversations during this time, and the situation became quite unpleasant. The passenger in front advised them to restrain themselves and not create a disturbance, and that was unnecessary, and the best thing was to just sit and be silent. But Feng Xiao was too interested in one question. What is the name of the guy who goes first? All they told him was that he is very strong, and it is better not to irritate him, and the stranger didn't want to say anything more. In fact, Li Fan had enough of this, and if this guy knows the art of cultivation, then it's worth testing his strength. This guy was called Li Fan. He was the commander of the tax collection squad in the finance department during the Black Warrior, and there were several assistants with him. Li Fan was quite arrogant, and he always believed that if this world were part of a novel, he would definitely be the main character. Ordinary cultivators trained diligently for decades, but he did it in just a few months, holding a high position in less than half a year. In this world, he considered himself the main hero, easily rising up, and soon he will be able to become the ruler of the world and marry a beauty from the clan. As these thoughts arose in his mind, he looked to the side and noticed Shenhua, but for a moment their eyes met. From Li Fan's facial expression, it was clear that he was very impressed by the beauty of the girl, and it seemed like it was eternal love at first sight. Shunhua was simply perfect, with slender legs, snow-white skin, dignified behavior, and simply an impeccable companion, created especially for him. While the arrogant guy fantasized about his future for several years to come, the girl simply continued to eat her noodles. Feng Xiao noticed the strange behavior and asked his friend if she knew this eccentric, and the girl replied that she had no idea who he was, but he looked very vulgar. Li Fan, being confident in himself, decides to take the first step by approaching Shunhua and inviting her to become his partner in cultivation. The girl doesn't even want to hear about it, and can't this guy see that she's not alone? And wasn't the person next to her invisible? The hero was hard to miss, and right now he was sitting next to his girlfriend and enjoying noodles. Li Fan asks not to joke, as if such a retarded person who doesn't even cultivate could be worthy of her attention. And yet, despite his age, he is already considered an important figure in the financial department, and by tying her life with him, she will sooner or later rise to the top of the world. These stories were interesting, but Shunhua had already said no, and the hero advised this eccentric to go about his business. However, Li Fan advises her not to rush into refusal, and after all, he has all the qualities of a protagonist, including ruthless murder. As it turned out, he completely destroyed the flow of rituals because they did not pay taxes, and Shunhua could not believe that he killed all these people. After this, Li Fan says that next time he will destroy the current of yellow tigers, because they began to restore the shelter without asking, and after this, they definitely won't have the money to pay taxes. Suddenly, a bowl of noodles flew towards this arrogant idiot, but his skills allowed him to easily dodge. Feng Xiao asked him to repeat what he said, and did he really just say that he intends to destroy the Yellow Tiger clan? The situation on the train suddenly became tense, and this indicated that a serious fight would soon begin. A plate of soup accidentally hit one of the members of the tax collection squad, and how dare they insult such high-ranking people? But the commander ordered everyone to calm down, and this was the usual action of the offended protagonist before hitting, and he asked Feng Xiao what he had to do with the Yellow Tigers. Feng Xiao actually respected these people, and they all called him bro, and despite the appearance of bandits, they were good people. Li Fan guessed that the guy came here to take revenge on the Yellow Tigers, and the hero replied that everyone can think what they want. But the arrogant commander insisted, and he wanted to know what the guy thought about this, and does he really want to fight him? Feng Xiao calmly replied that this idiot should stay away from the Yellow Tiger gang and the orphanage they are renovating, otherwise he will get into trouble. Li Fan mocked, listening to the secondary character make demands on the main character, and if he is so confident in himself, let him hit him. The hero warned his opponent not to speak so loudly, and after all, after his blow, Li Fan may not get up. The detachment commander didn't even want to hear about it, and how can this insignificant weakling hurt him, and he's just a regular brat? In this case, they should put up a real fight, and Li Fan will make him feel all his insignificance, and in this case he has no chance. He promises to defeat him, and Feng Xiao will then apologize on his knees, and if the hero wins, nothing will happen, and this is impossible. Feng Xiao notices that the carriage is too cramped, and for a real fight they need more space, and otherwise they will destroy everything here. The squad leader decides that the guy is going to escape, and if they don't have enough space here, then they need to go to the roof of the train, and from now on they will definitely have a duel. The hero was not against it, and he even liked this proposal, and Feng Xiao could no longer wait to test his new abilities. Xinhua was worried, and she didn't want her friend to fight now, and because his wounds have not yet healed, and why is he acting like a fool? But the guy did everything his own way again, and he assured his girlfriend that he was fine. His wounds were healing very quickly. The stranger sitting in front of them immediately realized that the hero knows how to create problems on his own head. A few minutes later, the opponents found themselves on the roof of the train, and now they were going to have a duel in which neither of them would hold back. Feng Xiao immediately began rummaging through his pockets in search of the necessary crystals, since without them, using the technique of appealing to the gods was impossible. However, today, it seems, no one was going to turn to the gods, since the guy discovered that he did not have a single stone. Apparently, he had spent them all somewhere earlier. The hero remembered that he had just used the last crystal for custard noodles, and although expensive, the taste was worth it. Suddenly, Zhang approached him from behind, suggesting that the guy, although he did not have money for a new card, he still had time from his previous use. Since he spent 3 days out of action, the spirit of the previous god was still available, as this time does not count. However, the power may have decreased, and the opportunity to continue to attack openly has disappeared, but it was better than nothing. If this is not enough, the guy will have to consider this fight as a severe test, and Zhang returns to the dungeon to sleep, and by the way, Li Fan turned out to be much stronger than the abbot in the temple. At this time, the hero looked as if he was talking to himself, begging his assistant not to leave him. Maybe this time he would help him. Meanwhile, the enemy wasted no time and immediately activated his precious protagonist kit. His main weapon was a massive fire sword known as the Sword of Boundless Heavens, and right now, Li Fan was preparing to strike with the spatial ring. Despite the guy's outward arrogance, his strength still made an impression, and this sword was truly impressive, and now the hero urgently needed to figure out how to resist. After a few seconds, Feng Xiao had a brilliant idea in his mind. Li Fan was so inspired by his greatness that it was decided to refuse the enemy's demand to apologize on his knees, and now he wanted him to disappear without a trace, swallowed up by the rays of glory of the main character. Immediately after this, the squad leader makes his first blow, simply amazing, and a huge wave of fire arises from one swing of the sword in the air. This flow of energy is so great that it covers the entire train, raising the temperature inside by several degrees. Shenhua, who was inside, immediately notices this, and the guy may look vulgar, but his strength is truly impressive, and he doesn't need mean tricks. The commander's wards, standing nearby, advise her to accept the fate of her friend and come to terms with his fate. The commander's weapon has incredible power in this world, and this small enemy will not even be able to take cover, and he's probably already dead, and she'd better obey her boss. These two idiots are annoying the girl, and they should be careful with their words, and Feng Xiao is not trash, and he will not lose to Li Fanyu. Suddenly there is a noise above them, and it is obvious that both rivals are now determining which of them is stronger. Shenhua looks out the window and sees the hero running along the train, somehow cheating physics. It's all about electromagnetic transformation, and by converting the electricity of the summon god into magnetic and directing it to the legs, you can move along the metal frame. He was lucky that he came up with it so quickly, but he wouldn't be able to escape for long. Feng Xiao understands this and, as soon as he has the opportunity, jumps behind his enemy. Li Fan is so intoxicated by his abilities that he forgets about defense, and this is the perfect moment for a hero. He gathers his last strength and uses an astral strike of 5 lightning bolts. Unfortunately, the attack does not reach its target, and the enemy has a special defensive technique that completely absorbs it. The situation is getting bad, and these were the guy's last strength, and now, without special crystals, he will not be able to turn to the gods. Although the hero avoided the attack from the Boundless Heaven Sword, this meant that the squad leader had greatly underestimated him. Did he think that the main character only has one weapon, and now Li Fan uses his talisman of divine reward, which saves him? The arrogant commander believed that Feng Xiao should accept reality and simply die along with his dreams.